Coming up, the number dead in the Itaewon crush disaster has risen to 154 as of Monday morning, with nearly 150 injured. Of the dead, 26 have been identified as foreigners. Our team is at one of the funeral sites, and we also bring in an expert to break down the current situation. A makeshift altar is set up at Seoul Plaza for people to pay their respects to the victims of the Itaewon crush disaster. Our team is also there. Plus, more condolences from leaders around the world, including Pope Francis, as South Korea mourns the Itaewon crush. We begin this morning as the number of casualties has been rising after Saturday night's crowd crush in Itaewon. Let's go straight to our reporter Kim Hyun-sung, who is standing by at the nearest hospital to where Saturday night's disaster happened, to fill us in on the latest updates. Hyun-sung, what are the reported casualties so far?
Toyon, the number of deaths from last Saturday night's crowd crush in Itaewon has risen to 154 as of last evening. Around 2/3 were women, and most victims were in their 20s. 11 people were in their teens, and 39 people were 30 years old or older. According to the latest update from the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters earlier this morning, several more injuries were reported. 149 people are reported to be injured, and we now know that at least 30 are in critical condition.
Now, you're at one of the funeral homes attached to the hospital in the area where the tragedy happened. How are the scenes there?
I'm at Suncheonang University in Seoul, where bodies of the 5 of the deceased are being kept. 6 bodies were moved here after Saturday night's calamity, but 1 was moved to a funeral home outside the city after the victim's family came to claim the body. There's going to be a funeral service soon for the 3 remaining Korean victims here. The 2 other deceased are from Iran and Japan, and their families have not yet arrived to claim the body. After the disaster, many of the injured and the deceased were moved to this hospital because it's very close to the area, just around 2 kilometers east of the site of the crowd crush. Witnesses who were standing by all day yesterday said that dozens of family members rushed to this hospital to check if their loved ones were among the dead or injured. And as of this morning, still one of the 154 victims from Itaewon's crowd crush remains unidentified. Back to you, Doyeon.
Thank you, Jensen, for the report. Now, among those who died, at least 26 were non-Korean citizens. 15 foreign nationals were injured. The figures were released by South Korea's foreign ministry on Sunday. The victims are from 14 different countries, including Iran, China, Russia, and the United States. Those injured were treated at nearby hospitals. While 9 have been discharged, 6 were still being treated as of Sunday night. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs said it will work to provide assistance to families of victims arriving in South Korea and during funeral arrangements. In addition, Foreign Minister Park Jin will send letters of condolences to the leaders of missions from victims' countries of origin here in South Korea. Now, as we've heard from previous reports, it's been a long and tragic weekend here, with the number of casualties continuing to rise. And starting today, memorial altars will be set up across the country so that anyone wishing to pay their respects to the victims can do so. For more, our very own Song Yujin joins us live from one. Yujin, tell us where you are.
Well, hello, Doyeon. I'm out at Seoul Plaza in front of City Hall, and it only takes 15 minutes here by car to Itaewon. And as you can see behind me, a group memorial altar has been set up. Flags are flying at high staff, and white chrysanthemums have been laid on the altar. And these flowers are the traditional mourning flowers here in South Korea. This comes as yesterday the government announced that it's going to install this site so that the general public could pay respects to the deceased. There are not many people yet because this altar is going to officially open to the public from 10 a.m., which is about an hour away. Now, this site will run until Saturday, November 5th, which is the last day of the 7-day national mourning period that was declared by South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol on Sunday. Official operation hours are from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., but citizens are welcome to come and pay their respects outside these hours if they wish.
Eugene, we expect there will be a lot of mourners visiting the altar once it opens, but could you tell us whether there are more options for people who wish to pay tribute?
Well, there'll be another one opening near the Noksapyeong station that's much closer to the scene of the accident, and this one is installed by the Yongsan-gu district office, and it's going to start receiving mourners from 10:30 a.m. today. And also, these two altars, they're also going to provide psychological support and counseling for visitors who wish to receive this. And throughout the nationwide mourning period, the government is planning to open more altars across the country. And details of these ones can be found online at each province's or city's website. That's all I have for now, but I'll be back with more updates in our later newscast at 11 o'clock after the altar opens to the public. Doyeon.
Thank you for the report, Eugene. Now, shocked by the tragedy in Itaewon, many foreign heads of state sent messages of condolences showing their support. Our Kim Yo-sun has more.
Global leaders sent condolences and words of support for South Korea following a deadly crush disaster at a Halloween event in Itaewon. U.S. President Joe Biden made a written statement on Saturday in which he sent his deepest condolences to the families who lost loved ones. Highlighting the strong alliance between Seoul and Washington, Biden added that the U.S. stands with Korea during this tragic time. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak took to Twitter to say, quote, "All our thoughts are with those currently responding and all Koreans." French President Emmanuel Macron also tweeted that France is by Korea's side after the tragedy in Itaewon. Saying that the events in Seoul come as a shock to all, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said on Twitter that it is a sad day for South Korea. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also sent his deepest condolences to the people of South Korea and expressed his wishes for a fast and full recovery to those who were injured. During Sunday's Angelus prayer from St. Peter's Square, Pope Francis turned his thoughts to the tragedy in Seoul.
And let us also pray to the risen Lord for those, especially young people, who died tonight in Seoul from the tragic consequences of a sudden crowd crush.
He also emphasized that human life and dignity are the most precious values. Meanwhile, foreign missions in Korea also gave the incident close attention, sharing statements from their own countries as well as emergency hotline numbers. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
Now let's take a deeper look at the circumstances surrounding this weekend's tragedy. We connect with an expert in disaster management. We speak to Professor David Oliver Kasdan from the Graduate School of Governance at Sungkyunkwan University. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning, Do-yeon. Thank you.
Now, you've been studying behavior of Koreans in disaster contexts from the perspective of a disaster management specialist. Was an incident of this scale expected from an expert's point of view? How would you describe the situation and the cause?
Well, I was horrified that it happened in the first place, but I can't say that I'm completely surprised given the context of Koreans' behaviors under conditions of stress and risk that it did happen. There's a lot of things I've been researching in terms of the collectivist society and how that affects people's decision-making under situations of risk. And collectivism has some associated behavioral biases, as we call them. And these include things like sort of a herd mentality or following the trend in crowds. And so the scale of this incident is unfortunate, but it can also sort of be understood based on how Koreans behave in past situations similarly.
Now, let's dig deeper into what you just mentioned, right? How Koreans act at certain, that you have studied. Surely incidents of this nature, though, can happen and do occur globally, but you say that there's something specific to Korean society that you would say make accidents like this more likely to occur compared to other countries.
Right. And this is not a criticism of Korean society or sociocultural dimensions at all. It's an observation, and the conditions that we found with for example, the Seoul ferry disaster in 2014, where the students were given instruction from the ship's authorities to remain in their cabin, even as the water, got up to their necks. And so under traditional Neo-Confucianism in this collectivist society, there are important foundations of deference to authority, and also the crowd mentality and sort of social harmony. So sticking together and following each other is very normal, and it's also very efficient for Korean society. But when the authority is absent or unable to act in a situation like we saw in Itaewon, there is sort of a sense of being lost or not knowing what to do. And there's a lot of modern sort of influences that are also building to the crowd behaviors that we saw in Itaewon, that, somebody said push and somebody else said pull, and in that sort of situation, there's the confusion and people's judgment is already clouded by drinking or just the party atmosphere. And so you get these shift from being rational, careful thinking into sort of this heuristic or gut reaction situations. And when you're in a condition of uncertainty, in a big crowd at night in a party atmosphere, that can get really chaotic, as we saw.
Like, just going further with that, maybe it justified some of the actions that happened for some people, as you said, as in a herd collective action, right?
Yeah, I mean, justify is going to allow somebody to lay blame somewhere. And while we can watch the videos and we can see that some people were sort of pushing in more of a spirit of, hey, let's get the crowd going, rather than let's pay close attention to what the situation is, and maybe we should back off. So, any sober moment, seeing a crowd that large, most people would shy away from it, especially when we think about issues like, of course, COVID spread or random acts of violence or terrorism these days. But at that time, in that place, there was supposedly a rumor that there was a K-pop star making an appearance, and so more people wanted to see what was there. And when you get that sort of momentum going, it can't stop. And you add in the physical constraints of the narrow alley, and that you have people coming up from the subway side and down from the uphill side of that same alley, and it's just going to build. And
right.
The mechanics of a crowd or a stampede were such that this exact alley sort of fed the disaster and,
right.
and aggravated it.
Right, and I want to get into the alley because you've been there as well, Professor, and it's a popular spot. And surely the streets of Itaewon could also be a factor here, not just the group psychology. A single misstep by someone or fall could have caused a snowballing effect in such a tight location. Is this something that you have seen before?
Sure. If we look at what happens in Saudi Arabia with the annual pilgrimage called the Hajj, where hundreds of thousands or millions of Muslims come to go through a religious rite. And there have been many tragic stampedes at this annual pilgrimage. And so the Saudi government took strict controls using physical barriers and structures, as well as some ICT sort of booking attempts to make these crowds a little more controllable. When it comes to Itaewon, though, I mean, we all know that Itaewon is a unique place with characteristics of these little narrow winding alleys and sort of a different feel than the rest of Seoul and the rest of Korea. It is, known to be an international area. It has its own characteristics. So when you're in that unfamiliar situation, or as a Korean, maybe a slightly foreign situation, you should raise your level of awareness and be a little more careful about how things go. But again, the situation was a party atmosphere, and people don't slow down and think in that case. They want to follow the surge. They want to be where the things are happening.
Right, and now we want to talk about the next step. It might be a little too soon, but what stage of recovery is the country at as a society? Less than 48 hours after the tragedy, what are the first steps to make sure the survivors are properly taken care of as they have traumatic experiences, and as well as for families and those close to the victims that we all mourn with?
Right. In disaster management, we use a cycle model for how disasters sort of unfold and what we do around it. And it starts with mitigation, or trying to reduce risk. Next comes preparedness, the specific things you can do to be ready for a disaster if it happens. And then comes the response, and that's the current stage of the cycle we're in right now. Sometimes they talk about the golden window, the 72 hours that somebody can survive after a terrible hazard. But this case, it played out quickly and very severely. So we're still in response phase, and then next would be coming the recovery. But in terms of the government's actions and response so far, they all put on their yellow or green jackets. They put the black ribbons on for all the government officials to show support and mourning. They declared Seoul, Itaewon first, and then Seoul overall as a special disaster zone, which will open up funding for medical cares, funeral costs, and some compensation for the families and survivors. What comes next, though, is sort of an opportunity to learn and to make some progress. If you watch some of the footage, you'll see how people were performing CPR on the streets. And not all of the CPR was done what we might think of as correctly. And understandably, it was a seriously panicked moment. But knowing CPR, knowing to sort of be aware of your surroundings and having exit routes or having alternative options available to you whenever you enter an unfamiliar situation, these are things that should be practiced and sort of trained. So the government could do a lot at this point, not only in the response phase, but to start cycling around again with the recovery and mitigation. Get people to stop and calmly think about their situations a little bit more. And the best way to really accomplish this is through training, practice, real practice, where you do CPR until it becomes second nature, where whenever you enter a potentially hazardous situation, you think about your alternative exits and what could possibly happen. So we have this moment. We have to take the time to grieve and to reflect on it, but that reflection needs to transition into a moment of growth.
Right. Well, thank you again for joining us this morning. I know we can talk for hours trying to recover and to mourn with the victims. But again, have a great day, and thank you again.
All right, thank you, Do-hyun.
Large-scale air drills between Seoul and Washington begin Monday, aimed at enhancing combat readiness and training for wartime contingencies amid mounting provocations from North Korea. Unlike in the past, when the Allies sought to keep a low profile, this aerial combat exercise is an apparent warning message for North Korea. The two allies are set to mobilize a total of 240 combat aircraft for the drills conducted in South Korean airspace. Thousands of service members from the ROK Air Force and the U.S. Air Force, as well as the U.S. Marine Corps, the U.S. Navy, and the U.S. Army will participate. The drills will continue for 5 days until Friday. For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning, Do-hyun.
Let's start in the U.S., where a man has been arrested for attacking the husband of U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Well, that is right. 82-year-old Paul Pelosi was assaulted by a male attacker with a hammer in his San Francisco home on Friday. Now, Mr. Pelosi sustained a fractured skull and injuries to his right arm and hands. Police disarmed and arrested the attacker, and Mr. Pelosi is reportedly recovering well in hospital. Authorities say the suspect broke into the Pelosi family home, attempting to tie up Mr. Pelosi, supposedly until the U.S. House Speaker returned, as she was in Washington, D.C. at the time. The latest incident has sparked concerns over potential political violence in the lead-up to the November 8 midterm elections. Now, more than 80 people have been killed in the collapse of a pedestrian suspension bridge in India. Many others are still missing. The bridge collapsed on Sunday evening, local time, in Gujarat State's Morbi city, plunging hundreds of people into the Machu River below. The collapse comes just 1 week after the 230-meter-long crossing reopened after a 6-month renovation. According to officials, the 19th-century bridge buckled under the weight of too many people. Authorities have dispatched emergency rescue teams, aided by Navy and Air Force personnel. Meanwhile, India's Prime Minister has made compensation available to families of those killed or injured in the disaster. Moving over to Somalia now, where at least 100 people have been killed and over 300 injured by twin car explosions in the capital, Mogadishu. The blasts on Saturday were just moments apart at a bustling market junction, damaging buildings and vehicles. The first explosion hit the country's education ministry, and the second blast came as ambulances and helpers flocked to the scene. Jihadist group Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for the attack, saying the country's education ministry was targeted for using a Christian-based syllabus to teach Somali children. The blasts follow another attack in August, where 21 people were killed after Al-Shabaab took control of a hotel in Mogadishu. The attacks are part of a 15-year conflict between the Somalian federal government and Al-Shabaab over control of the country. And in our final story, Switzerland has claimed the world record for the longest ever passenger train to take a trip. The train was made up of 100 carriages, measuring a total distance of 1.9 kilometers and weighed almost 3,000 metric ton. The record-breaking train took an hour-long journey along the UNESCO Heritage Albula line from Preda to Alvenoy in eastern Switzerland. The train was run by Rhaetian Railway as part of the 175-year jubilee of Swiss Railways, the country's first rail system.
Good morning. Please dress accordingly for the weather. Temperatures in most regions will be 1 to 3 degrees higher than seasonal norms. But those in Daegu are waking up to just 7 degrees, but that will hike near the 20s by the afternoon. So please do expect to have wide gaps in readings between lows and highs in most regions. Then as soon as November kicks in, there will be a dramatic drop in temperatures. And by this Saturday morning, temperatures will go down to just 2 degrees Celsius here in Seoul, so beware of up and down temperatures this week. Inland regions had a rough start to the day with that thick fog, so please drive with care, especially those driving near water. Then skies will turn sunnier and afternoon highs will be a couple degrees higher in central regions, but down south will be similar to Sunday. And decent air quality is expected nationwide today. Typical late autumn weather with sunny skies to dominate the first week of November, with a huge drop in readings as we get into the end of the week. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for our Tuesday's edition at the same time. Please stay with us for more updates throughout the day. Have a lovely day or evening wherever you are, and take care.
A global network representing Korea.